my iPod to my phone was a little too inconvenient. So let's make things even easier by just joining them into one device, thus the smartphone, where you have everything clickable, where you can have music, video, where you can FaceTime, chat, everything in one device. This is what we're all about in a nutshell. Agreed? A lot of our technological advances basically go like this, where if you could do one incremental thing to make things a little bit easier, you pretty much make yourself a millionaire. We are a culture that is obsessed with ease and instant results. And what's interesting is this affects us in ways that we didn't really quite foresee. So I'm done with that picture. If you feel free to move on from it. I was listening to a bunch of sports writers and announcers talking about incoming draft classes in their sports. I pay attention to hockey, but I've also been listening to a lot of basketball writers. If you're not familiar with draft classes, what people will do is they'll scout athletes around the high school age throughout the country and even abroad, and they start to rank them in terms of what position they feel they should be drafted. And a lot of people, if you're good enough, you will be drafted and instantly play in the most professional leagues. You consider guys like LeBron James went straight from high school to playing in the NBA. And because of social media attention, we have a lot of people growing up and striving to be athletes that think that we can go straight from high school to playing in the most professional leagues. But one of the things that we don't tend to see on TV is that every sports team has a development league. And a lot of times we don't pay attention to the fact that there's a lot of players that get drafted that have to play in development leagues. And I was listening to these draft analysts talk about they have this incoming class of athletes that have grown severely disappointed because they got drafted and didn't immediately play in the NBA or the NHL. Because they grew up in this world where they could have everything they wanted at the click of a button. Whatever video they want to watch, they can easily go onto YouTube and find it within seconds. You think about one of the things that we tend to complain about as a culture is when our Wi-Fi is too slow. Wi-Fi, no matter how slow it is nowhere near as slow as it was when we had dial-up internet. Do you remember dial-up internet? I do. It was painful, because we only had one landline in my house. So I'd be using the internet, I would have to wait for it to go through the 5 minutes to connect, and all of a sudden, my sister would be downstairs yelling, saying, "Kuya, I gotta use the phone, get off the internet." And I'd be like, "No, I'm working on something." She's like, "No, you're not, you're just trying to look up videos," which took like half an hour to watch one. And eventually my sister would get so fed up where she would purposely pick up our landline, because if she picked it up for 30 seconds, it would kick me off the internet. And then when I tried to go back online, it wouldn't work out because every time it tried to connect, I could hear her voice on my computer. So eventually my parents were like, "I guess we got to get 2 landlines." What I'm saying is, this wasn't that difficult in terms of the times, but it was a lot more difficult compared to now. We complain about things like slow Wi-Fi. The point I'm making is this. We have a culture that is used to instant results, and we're used to doing things to make our lives that much easier, but let's be honest about life. That's just not how life works. Then let's be honest about church. That's not what we're called to be and called to do. So why don't we go back to our main text and think about what it says, because the first point that we're going to make is this. When it comes to Christian community, when it comes to the church, when it comes to what we're called to be, if we dare say that we are God-centered and Bible-focused, we have to remember that Christian community is not about your preferences. Feel free to fill these along in your notes. Christian community is not about your preferences. It's about knowing God. It's about serving Him. It's about serving each other. So back in our main text, I'll read through it again. Peter says in verses 4 and 5, he says, as you come to him, a living stone, he says, know that he, Jesus, was this living stone who was rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. You yourselves are called to be like him, living stones that are being built up to be a holy priesthood. And in verse 9, he says, you are a chosen race and a holy nation. So Peter is writing this letter to the church at this time who's going through persecution. And rather than address the persecution himself and say, you know what, it'll come to an end, he says, realize that you're being persecuted because the one you followed was also persecuted and rejected. If he was going to be persecuted and rejected, how are you going to assume that things are going to be any easier for you? And the thing is, this reminds us that if a community is going to be really centered around God, it's going to show people giving up things like comfort and preferences and even their own quarrels among each other for the sake of being built up to be like Jesus. The whole purpose of this community, to be this chosen people, to be this holy nation, was to declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into this marvelous light. Realize that this is the church. We are the called out ones. And because we know what it means to be lost and to be found, to be fatherless and now to be adopted, he's like, Peter's saying, remember that that is the purpose. That your preferences and everything you're going through personally are not centric. Not that we're trying to completely belittle them. Know that that's not the focus of what we're going through. So Peter's presenting an image of community that is focused entirely on Jesus. One who forsakes preference and comfort zones. And the thing is that this is completely contradictory to what we aim to do as a culture and as a community. We tend to do things to make things easier for ourselves. We tend to do things based on our preferences and instant gratification. But we have to remember that within the Christian community, within church, we are not customers. And we tend to say this thing all the time, that the customer is always right, and we take that mentality into everything else that we do. We assume that we as consumers need to be catered to, and we take that attitude into the church, and we say, you know what? I'm a consumer, I'm a customer, now you sell me on your product. And when this attitude seeps into our worship, it goes from being about knowing God and serving him to fulfilling our carnal, fleshy desires. And what we find is that we start to look from church to church to find the one that fulfills our desires. We begin this endless quest of trying to find the perfect church, which ends up being completely fruitless if you think about it. It's something that Pastor Sam has talked about for the past couple weeks, where he reminds us that the perfect church doesn't exist, guys. The perfect church doesn't exist. And if the perfect church did exist, you should never show up. Because if the perfect church existed, the second you walk through its doors, it stops being the perfect church. So maybe we stop looking for that. Maybe we stop looking for the church that fulfills our desires, per se. Maybe we stop doing this dance where we start to critique every church based on its worship style and how entertaining the sermons are, and really get into what we're meant to do. Dr. A.R. Bernard talks with his members when they go through baptism and membership class. He basically tells them, welcome to church membership. And he subtly tells them that you're not really quite part of the church community, but you are a member. And I remember people asking, what's the difference? And he says this: you can be baptized and you are welcomed into the church as a whole. You might start attending a local church, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a part of it. He says, you are a true part of a church community when you commit to going and you're presented with something that makes you want to leave, but you choose to commit to stay anyway. I think that's one of the marks of true church community commitment. When you're presented with the realities of church, when the rose-tinted glasses come off and you start to see how messy things can get, and rather than aim for the back door and head out and try to find the next church that'll suit your needs, you decide, you know what? We're going to stay because God's calling us to something here, that this place is not perfect, but God's calling us to do work here. Charles Spurgeon has this awesome quote where he says, the church is faulty. The church is faulty, but that is no excuse for your not joining if you are truly belonging to the Lord. Another quote is this: the church is faulty, the church is messed up. You should fit right in. That was from the Reverend A.J. Komoda. The church is faulty, you should fit right in, guys. Let's be honest. Because this was never really about us. The church is not about fulfilling our preferences. The church is about knowing God, about serving Him, and being with other people. Because you know what? This is hard. But to that I say this: the Christian life was always meant to be hard, amen? So my encouragement to us all is this: let's begin to really embrace this discomfort. Let's embrace this discomfort. Let's look into our next verse, John 12:25. John 12:25 says this: whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever loves his life is going to lose it, and whoever hates it in this world will keep it for eternity. And this is something interesting because this is telling us, what does it mean to hate his life? Well, long story short, this reminds us that honestly following Jesus, which is different from merely being a fan of Jesus, really following Jesus requires us to die to ourselves. When it comes to the part of ourselves that wants to chase all the bells and whistles of this world, following Jesus means that part of ourselves needs to die in a lot of ways. And what does it mean when it looks like hate? So I have this interesting, I have a weird sense of style. I think you guys know this by now. I try to wear a button-up shirt on Sunday, but if you've ever seen me Monday through Saturday, you've probably noticed I basically live in gym clothes because I like to be comfortable. And one of the brands that I typically wear is this by this company called Hate Brand Goods. And I always end up having these weird conversations. My wife Renata has seen it where we'll be on vacation and strangers will come up to me and say, what does your hat say? Or what does the back of your shirt say? And the whole Hate Brand thing is funny because it has the letter H and the Roman numeral 8. So it's like H, V, and 3 I's. And it was like, what's the HIV? I was like, no, it says hate. They're like, oh, hate. Wait, why would you want to promote hate? So then I have to go through this long discourse about how I'm not trying to promote hate and division. I'm talking about hate in such a way that this is a brand that's talking about athletes and people who want to excel to top levels of their crafts. It's talking about like the person playing basketball in high school who, after their practice is done, goes to the free throw line and shoots 300 more free throws. This is the guy who wants to make the track team and gets up at 5 a.m. in the blistering cold just to practice on some sprints. This is the guy who, friends I know who want to do bodybuilding competitions, who go through months of eating nothing but rice cakes and tilapia, which has got to be the most flavorless fish I've ever seen. Tilapia and some things like chicken breasts are really just vessels for barbecue sauce. I don't know. And then you see people do these things, and we'll go out, and my friends will be eating nothing but bland chicken and broccoli, and I'll say this, I'll be like, hey, you must really hate yourself. It's like, for you to be willing to put all this work in, you must really hate yourself. Because sometimes that's what discipline looks like. That's what the willingness to fight looks like. When you believe in something, you're willing to go through discipline in order to excel to it. The same is true in this Christian life. Because Jesus is so worth it, following him looks like you hate yourself at times, because you know that living a life of discipline, while to some people looks like you're trying to strip things away, to me it means if I could strip things away in order to have more of him, I'm going to do it. If stripping other things away means that I could love him on a higher plane and obey him in a way that I couldn't before, take it all away. We see this echoed in the hymns that say, you know what, take the world, take it all.